Hi.
Hey, let's just wait a minute or two for folks to come in. I'm gonna kind of adjust my tripod, get a sense of what the camera situation is like. Okay, I guess we can get started. Hi everyone. Welcome to Topical Cream's RX Studio. My name is Elizabeth Wiet. I am a writer and a curator. I currently serve as Topical Cream's editorial and programming associate, and I've conducted a number of written interviews for Topical Cream, but this is my first time hosting RX Studio, so I am super excited to be here kicking off our 2022 program with a conversation with Lex Brown. And I first became familiar with Lex's work about 5 years ago when we were on a panel together at Yale for a screening of post-punk feminist video art. And actually one of the main artists featured in that program was Colette, who was just the subject of a big retrospective at Deli Gallery that closed last week. And so somehow the timing of this feels serendipitous. Before we jump into our conversation, I'll say a little bit more about Lex and her work for those who might not be familiar. Lex Brown is an artist who uses poetry and science fiction to create an index for our psychological and emotional experiences as organic beings in a rapidly technologized world. She has performed and exhibited work at the New Museum, the High Line, the International Center of Photography, Recess, and the Kitchen in New York, Red Cat Theater and the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, the Baltimore Museum of Art in Baltimore, and at the Munch Museum in Oslo, Norway. She was a 2021 recipient of the USA Fellowship. She holds an MFA from Yale University and a BA from Princeton University. She's the author of My Wet Hot Drone Summer, a sci-fi erotic novella that takes on surveillance and social justice, first edition published by Badlands Unlimited. The book Consciousness, a survey of Brown's work spanning the past 8 years, is available from Genderfeo. She teaches as a media fellow in art, film, and visual studies, and theater, dance, and media at Harvard University. She's also the host of the podcast 1-800-POWERS, which is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I'm so thrilled to have this opportunity to give our audience at Topical Cream a deeper look into Lex's practice. We launched the RX Studio program in 2019 as a sort of therapeutic take on the traditional studio visit, allowing artists to engage in peer-to-peer conversations without commercial or institutional pressure. And so in that spirit, I am actually calling from this little reading nook that I have in my apartment. And when I don't have to be at my desk, looking at 100-column spreadsheets or answering emails, this is where I go to slow down and think and write and read. And so to begin, Lex, I thought I would ask you where you're calling from and what you've been up to lately.
Totally. Thanks so much for having me here, Elizabeth. I'm so excited, and it's really good to reconnect. I am also in my nook. I'm in a chair that I just got yesterday, and I'm so excited because it feels like I'll give you guys a peek of the view the other way out. So this is my office slash exercise room. So I do a lot of mental and physical activity here, and I am in Philly.
And what have you been up to lately? What's going on in Philly?
So my life is really interesting right now because I go up to Boston every week. I go up to Cambridge to teach. So I'm kind of like in two places at once. That's sort of like the main thing that occupies my time, is just sort of like getting from one city to another. But my studio is here, and I've just started getting back into some more like physical practices, some more body work, taking ballet, which is exciting. And yeah, just kind of working through new ideas in the studio again after the show that I had this last year in 2021.
Right.
Yeah, and so I was just splitting my time between here and Cambridge.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
And
I've had a number of friends and colleagues over the years who have made that the New York to Cambridge commute, or from Philly, or even from DC. You know, it really runs the gamut. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about like all of the different prongs in your practice. You really are a true polymath. You work so capaciously and substantively across almost every single major medium, and I'm gonna have to look at my notes to make sure I remember to say them all. You know, you've worked across performance, video, writing, sculpture, drawing, painting, and podcasting. And so I wanted to ask you what motivates you to take such a multidisciplinary approach.
yeah, the one thing that's not on there is photography.
Oh yeah, of course. My apologies for forgetting that.
No. I mean, that's the one thing that I don't work in, and
Oh, okay.
which is an interesting mystery to me, is like, what is the image? But I guess like what motivates me or compels me is it's just natural. It just is my nature. It's just like the way that life is expressing itself through me. And so I follow it and I don't try to control it. But I also think like being a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary artist, there's pros and cons to that professionally. There's, always something that I can do. It can always sort of like hop from place to place or context to context. But then also at the same time, don't fit all the time in like a box of any kind of like box of like mastery. I guess over time I've kind of come to realize and learn that what I do is I connect these things and I use these different I learn so much by working in so many different medium. And I love to learn like new ways of thinking, and then I like to try to apply those ways of thinking in different ways, or be able to speak to other people through as many different languages as I can. And so yeah, I think that's a lot of it. And then there's also just being an artist today, like how many decades out from the art in the expanded field. And just when I started making art, or when I came to art, and my way to art was through school. So it was very conceptually focused. I sort of just took it as a given that everything was up for grabs in terms of material to work with. And so it's kind of like being able to work in different forms is the medium through which something else is achieved.
Yeah, I was actually a women's and gender studies major in college because I was much more interested in exploring like a particular subset of ideas. And as those interests evolved, you know, I wrote about visual art and performance and literature, and I just kind of allowed that thinking to take me where it needed to go. And I think there was something that was very special about that. I did want to ask you about the influence of science fiction on your work. Science fiction obviously is at its root a narrative form. You know, it has its roots in literature and then also in film. And so for that reason, you know, its influence on something like your novella, My Wet Hot Drone Summer, is pretty obvious. That's partly written in that genre itself. But I'd be curious to hear where else you might see the influence of science fiction coming into your practice.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much since the point where I wrote that book, which I think is like 7 years ago now, every piece of work that I've done since then has had some aspect of science fiction, or I would say maybe more speculative fiction. Um, just because the state of like technology, at least in America, we're so immersed in it. It's like kind of, to me, is like yeah, like any kind of speculative fiction is is a science fiction. Um, and so, like in my last show, the video communication, which is about communication, and was me working through communication in relation to others, communication as this like big communication, telecommunication as this way that controls us and guides us or forces us places without us really knowing. And then also inner communication with like intuition, with a deeper voice, with a more powerful force. All those things are intertwined into that narrative. And there's also a character, Sylvie, who's an artificially intelligent being, and she comes up against Lucida, who is the intuitive voice of one of the characters. So that's in the most recent piece. And then the other works that I've done, like in drawing, They Flew to Planet Nova, which is a show that I had a couple years ago. And it feels like, oh my God, like a couple years ago, it feels like 6 years ago now. It was only like 2 years ago. But that body of work was really focused on where I grew up in Northern Virginia, which is outside of Washington, D.C. And there are a lot of server farms. If you don't know what a server farm is, not, well, if you or anybody else doesn't know what a server farm is, it's like a huge building where the servers that hold all the data and all of our information, the cloud, are actually housed. And so I was thinking about that, but also just what, I guess, like what it means or how I interpret my own positionality. Being a Black artist, being a female artist, being a Black female artist, person in a Black woman's body, being a person who's like lived a life that nobody constructed this country in linguistic terms of here are the laws here. Being a person who is never supposed to exist, sort of like I feel oftentimes like I'm in uncharted territories. I oftentimes feel like I am a speculative fictionally person. Maybe not through my own perspective, but maybe through the other who would other me. So yeah, that's how I kind of like generally think about it. And then also science fiction is just such a useful and really, really not just useful, like profoundly important form. Like when we take into consideration global warming, and I forget what's called, like solar cooling. That I was just reading about this. People like at Harvard who want to like block out the sun rather than reduce carbon emissions. Some of those ideas are like, some things come actually from science fiction. Like there are certain technologies that we have that literally come from fictional books. And so at a certain point, I just realized that fiction was a really important way to think through things, and an important place to put these ideas.
Yeah, one of the narratives that is out there about science fiction is that it provides us metaphors for thinking through the world as it already exists in a sort of Brechtian way. You know, it allows for displacement, estrangement. But I like that you mentioned that science fiction has also given us language that then gets used in I don't want to say the real world, but there's more of a symbiotic relationship there. And I think too, you mentioned telecommunications. Gretchen Bender very famously compared the AT&T logo to the Death Star from Star Wars. And so that's an example of drawing something from like the SSF realm to understand something technological that's already out there. One of the things that really strikes me about your work is the way that it can engage the viewer on so many different emotional registers. I know a lot of your work is darkly comic or droll. You know, we see this in your 2017 show, Immortal Duck, which was inspired by a trio of Looney Tunes cartoons where Daffy Duck was shot by Elmer Fudd 18 times but didn't die. But at the same time that your work can be comic, it can be funny, a lot of your work, to me at least, is also profoundly affecting and even sad. When I saw your show Defense Mechanisms in a couple of months ago, there were a few works in there, particularly the Morning Prints and the Healing Drawing, that really spoke to certain experiences that I had had during the early months of the pandemic, and they were really moving to me. I remember that the Healing Drawing in particular, it combined text and image in a really interesting way as it visualized the process of recovering from a disappointment or a trauma. You know, that movement from feeling to peeling to healing as being both a flower and a mountain set against a tempestuous sky. And the other thing that struck me about that drawing was the fact that the words were mostly constituted by negative space. You know, they weren't written on, they were shaded in with pencil less than the surrounding structure. And I think that really added to the effect. There's a lot more I could say about that drawing. It really did stick with me, but instead I'll turn it over to you. How do you think about the role of affect and feeling in your work?
Yeah, well, I guess first and foremost, I guess I would say like we all feel, and if I wasn't feeling, then I'd be like too bad or something. But it's true. Like I use emotion and feeling as a material. Some artists do that, some artists don't. I'm like part of the group that does that. And sometimes that emotionality, that affect is more expressive. Other times it is something that I am trying to use as like a mechanism or a tool in order to insert people into a certain headspace to receive other connections or other information. But there is always something of the genuinely emotionally expressive for me, because that's like how I get into the work. That's how I understand how do I put it? I don't know. It's like there's something that I have to put outward, like through a very clear emotional register, to know that it will reach somebody in a certain way and like provoke a certain response or level of engagement. And it has to be something real. And I'm, constantly trying to find like what's real for me right now, not because that's the thing that's always real for a viewer, but it's more so the energetic quality of my connection to that thing. That energetic quality is what transfers to the viewer, even if they're not feeling the same thing or agreeing with the same thing or thinking about it or seeing the same thing. So it's really like tactile and practical in that sense too. And it's also the thing that I want to undercut, and both undercut and superimpose upon and supersede the more topical themes, like the more the things that are kind of like representative of like our place in time right now, like architecture or political processes or themes of identity, or just kind of all of these like linguistic entities that are more temporary. I want to reach through to that more like permanent, uniquely human emotional register, which is also because I think part of patriarchy is that emotions become dismissed and like somehow become weirdly like gendered, and it's very, very weird because like humans are like so emotional, and emotions are what shapes reality. emotions are like the lens through which we make most of our decisions, as much as we want to, you know, be rational about it. You can't be rational unless you're in like a good emotional space. So that's also the kind of way in which I want emotions to come forward in the work, is so that people understand that there's a not just intelligence to emotion, but like emotion is powerful beyond what we really understand typically in like a social sense.
Yeah, I remember when I was applying to grad school for a PhD in English literature, the advice that I got, that I think anybody gets from their professors when they want to do graduate studies in literature, is they get told, don't write in your personal statement how much you love literature. You know, leave the feeling out of it, write about your research interests. And I understand where they're coming from. They want you to get specific in terms of who you envision yourself as a scholar being, but at the same time, when I think about what drew me to the study of literature and to art in general, one of the things that I cared about so much was writers who formed very deep emotional attachments to the written works of other writers, because there was something in their personal experiences. Many of these were queer writers who found themselves isolated. And so they found a sort of affective connection in literature, and it sort of almost created a form of symbolic community. And so like coming to grad school, I was like, no, I don't want to leave feeling out of it, because it's such a huge part about what drives both the creation and the reception of art. And obviously there's so many brilliant thinkers who have thought through the relationship between affect and art and literature. If I can be a little bit cheeky, I would like to return to the figure of Daffy Duck. I know, I think Daffy Duck sort of, he occupies a role somewhat akin to a clown or a jester within the Looney Tunes universe. You know, that's true for a work like Duck Amuck. And I've actually been thinking a lot about clowning as a performance form a lot lately, especially since I saw Alex Tatarski's show at the Kitchen in November. And Alex is really thinking about what it means to clown in times that can feel very apocalyptic, you know, what it means to clown through incredible social and economic upheaval, to clown through environmental catastrophe. And I can see some resonances there with your work as well. I know clowning has an important place in your practice. You've taken clowning workshops, you've taught clowning workshops. So I wanted to ask you what drew you to clowning as a performance form, and how we might see it play out in your practice.
Yeah, it really is. I think well, I've had like little aha moments with many different forms where I'm like, oh, this is the thing where everything makes sense, like everything comes together. But I think clown really felt like, and feels like a very like holy practice. Like it's very, I mean, it's whole, like you're really whole. And that practice, like you're really like, you know, go up on stage and it's like, make us laugh. And okay, that brings it like puts you through so many, puts you through so many emotions. It puts you through like, in such like simple ways, you really start to like understand your own social conditioning and others. And there's a very particular quality to clown humor. It's not exactly improv. It's not exactly, it's not like jokes. It can be very physical, but it doesn't have to be. It's like in this super specific in-between place of the real and the not real, but always like the real. And it's like in a super specific place of play. So it was very liberating to me and like very profound to me to encounter this craft and this tradition that's really about honesty and presence. And and then it builds from there, and you know, you can build into narratives, and you can build into a different kind of like quality to the craft that is maybe more explicitly tuned to the theatrical, or tuned to a show, like making a show. But for me and my work, it's something that I come back to, I think as like, I come back to it as like an attitude sometimes to have with making. It's like the attitude of like accepting the flop, the humor in the flop, the beauty in the fact that you don't actually have to do anything funny to make somebody laugh. You just have to laugh, and then like the other people will laugh because of that. So there's like this sort of like body magic in clown that is really important to me. It's from doing so many classes and workshops. There's also just like clown community, which is great, but it gave me more confidence as a performer and as a person. And then like pedagogically, I come back to clowning exercises all the time, like whether I'm teaching like a performance class or teaching a video class or teaching some other thing. There's just a lot of tools from that tool bag that are really, really useful for getting people like on the ground of reality, and like, let's be in the room now. And like, you know, you really see how when you're watching other people kind of like go through these activities or working in this way, you see how much it's amazing. Like most people are not really aware of like what their body is doing, or that they walk into the room a certain way, or that like there's a character that you're playing, and there's like characters that we all play. So I think just the having that perspective of the performance of everyday life, because that is kind of the humor of the clown is the ecstasy and the torment of the ordinary, and the universality of that. And that's just been tremendously powerful to me.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation that you were studying ballet, which in some ways is a very different performance forms. You know, its movements are deliberate and studied, and often symbolic, or I don't want to say artificial, but many ballet moves are not movements that, you know, we experience in everyday life. And that's why something like Judson was so radical at the mid-century, was because folks like Yvonne Rainer were bringing everyday movement into dance, into ballet. So is there anything you want to say about the turn to ballet, about what you're hoping to get out of that study?
I'm just so excited about it. I mean, I really just started, but it's so, I think because I've been such a generalist, there's something in the precision that is just incredible, to like, you know, to like practice like this, what's it called, an angele, like this very specific movement. I don't know if I'm doing it right. Like with your hand, that like you're saying is like unnatural. Like I would never place my hand like on myself, like, or on something like so lightly. And so it's like this attention, and then you're always like, okay, where's my back, where are my shoulders, like where are my feet? It's like this incredible attention that you're like paying to like every muscle in your body. But then the result, like when you see people who have such fine control of their body, and they're able to move through space at a speed that is not conventional, is it's just really powerful. It's really powerful. So I'm just kind of like returning to a place of like my body, and because I haven't performed live in, it's 2022. I guess I haven't performed live in 3 years. COVID. Yeah, we all know about that.
Yeah.
But it's still like, it's still weird and strange to like say that because we've just been in this time warp. But yeah, I'm feeling really keen about like specificity, and also, like the really working with like the energy of my body, the energy in the room, the subtlety and precision. Um, so yeah, I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, and I'm sure that sort of deep bodily awareness can also feel meditative. It's bringing you right into the present in a way, and slowing things down. One thing that I did want to ask you about as we get towards the end of our conversation is about some of the themes that were present in your recent show, Defense Mechanisms, which we talked a little bit about. I think some people who might be very casually familiar with your work, maybe your shows at the Kitchen or Recess, would think of you as an artist who's really interested in the relationship between surveillance and technology and sociality and everyday life. But the works that I'd mentioned, Healing and Mourning, depict flowers and organic forms, and then also there were those tree trunk sculptures in the show, which were mounted with I think like telephone handsets and video monitors, and those really sort of represented the space where technology and nature meet. So I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit more about the relationship between the organic and the artificial in your work. And I think it's something that you talked a little bit about when you were talking about the body, talking about feeling, but I would welcome you to expound upon it a little bit more. I think at the front of the gallery in the Defense Mechanism show was it was a surveillance camera that per the checklist was titled A Footnote or Red Herring, which would imply that that show really wasn't about surveillance, but obviously you were thinking about the relationship between nature and technology in such a significant way in that show. So I'd be curious to hear you talk a little bit more about what you were thinking about there.
Yeah, I mean, it is true, like surveillance, surveillance is just the form of the power structured now. So I'm interested in power. I'm interested in real power, like internal power. I'm also interested in like ways that power is manipulated or warped. So surveillance is just like the drag that power is doing right now, in a technocratic state. So it's not. I use it as like it's just a symbol.
Yeah.
It's not something that I. It's not something that I like will delve like super deep into tons of research and then want to present something from kind of like a research perspective. It's more about the language of it. It's more about, okay, this is like the language of this sort of technology, but now putting it up against the language of like the color, and also like the language of the affect that we were talking about before. And also, I mean, that show too is this like real cross point, or like some curve meeting the tangent of like a line somewhere, of going through the changes that I experienced through pandemic and lockdowns. Like everyone else, I really had a lot of time to just sit down and feel and be and heal. There were a lot of things that I needed to heal, that I hadn't had the time or space to do before. And that's kind of, isn't that the point of life? So I'm always like wanting to put the technological, not because there's anything wrong with technology, it's just most of the ways that technology is used are horrible. So I really like want to put the technology like in its proper place with you know, like nature or like the body, because the technology is not organic. So the technology is always a subset of the human. It's not, it can't override the human. Like the artificial intelligence is never going to be smarter than us, especially when you look at who's making the artificial intelligence, okay? It's not going to be, it can't be too bright if it's only reflecting world views and certain people's ways of traveling through the world. Um, Nevertheless, it's still, you know, can be super violent. It's like really scary. But part of using nature so much, color, flower, the organic, is to remind people to not have this doom mentality, to not have this fatalistic. Sorry, I'm just trying to plug in my phone. To not have this fatalistic, apocalyptic, like, oh my god, if it, like, yeah, the shit is crazy. Like, it's fucking crazy. Yeah, it is. But like, okay, like, what are we gonna do? We're in the age of decomposition, trauma, and trash. That's our time. This is our time to shine. I don't know why we're all here right now, but like, that's the truth. And so I feel like thinking about the organic and focusing on the organic is also to not let the man-made catastrophe become larger than the truth of life, and like the truth of life cycles and the truth of organic life, which is what we are coming, what we come from. So it's just really important to me to remind people of that. And that's also why I started this podcast, is so I can just constantly be reminding myself and others, like, you know, there's a lot to feel incredibly depressed about. And there's a lot of reasons why, like, you know, you wouldn't want to get out of the bed. But the fact of the matter is, everything that is a problem is something that's been created. So it's like, are you gonna focus on that? Like, are you gonna give all the apocalyptic stuff all of your power? Like, are you gonna let that have more power than you? Or like, are you gonna like focus on your healing and the body and beauty and love and connection? And like, oh my gosh, like, let's not let Jeff Bezos get us down, even if he's got a huge rocket ship or Blue Origin. Like, okay, we're the Earth people, so we need to figure our shit out, and we can't figure our shit out until we heal. And yeah, so that's that's where like the nature and the affect comes in to uh to show how much the technological is just a figment of
Yeah, I, like a number of people during the pandemic, have really become a plant person. You can see I've got this tiny monstera and a bird's nest fern behind me. And as I think about what motivated that, I think it had less to do with the fact that, you know, I was on Zoom at my computer all day and needed something outside of that technology, and more to do with the fact, in a humble way, I've been in my apartment. Everything here is a personal space, but it's still a built environment. Other than the food in my fridge, my cat who's on the sofa, there's not a lot of organic material. And so I think maybe unconsciously, the desire to cultivate plants was a way to bring that connection to other organic material back into my space. And it's also been heartening to like watch a calathea that had been, you know, on its last legs come back and continue to grow. And like, I've troubleshooted plant maintenance with friends of mine who suddenly I had this new thing I could connect to them with. And so like, I really appreciate what you're saying about that sort of return to something that's been part of who we are much longer than the technology was. And certainly surveillance and the way it exists in the form of surveillance cameras or internet tracking, it's only the most recent, you know, instantiation of that form of power, right? Like the word survey is the root of surveillance, you know, that kind of scopic oversight, whether it be in the form of cartography or Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon. Like, it's always been there, it just manifests in different ways. And I like that you are sort of taking that idea of the surveillance camera and humbling it a little bit, kind of saying this is one version of something that's part of a greater power system, but also saying it's beside the point. You know, we're drawing to the end of our conversation. You mentioned teaching at Harvard. You mentioned your podcast. Is there anything you want to say beyond your studio practice, about what exists beyond your studio practice? You know, what is never going to be shown in a gallery, but still part of the work that you do?
Well, I feel like so much of what I do is like out there. I mean, I think a lot of part of the work that I do is like give and receive friendship. And I'm really grateful for my friends. And I've really appreciated the ways in which in the last couple of years, like, I've gotten to really enjoy and lean on those friendships. And give and receive guidance from my friends. So I guess that's what I would say. I'm wondering if anybody has any questions who's watching, because I'd love to answer a question if anybody has any.
Yeah, we have a little question box that everybody should be able to click on their screens, where you can just type in anything. We'll give it a few more seconds. Well, shall we end there?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. To those who have tuned in, thank you so much for watching. Like I said, we are so grateful that we can platform your work at Topical Cream. I know so many of us in the Topical Cream community have long admired everything you've done, and I'm glad we were able to personally reconnect as well. So we'll end the conversation there. I hope everybody out there has a wonderful weekend and wonderful evening, just as the sun is setting here on the East Coast. So we'll end it here. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth, and thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.